During the 17th century, the city of Amsterdam basked in a golden age. The Royal Palace, built in 1648 as the city's town hall, is an enduring physical reminder of those heady days. In 1631, a 25-year-old Dutch artist arrived here from his home city of Leiden. His sole intention was to take advantage of Amsterdam's thriving art market and build a career as a famous artist. His name was Rembrandt van Rijn.
He must have a great impact on the self-esteem of artists. You could say in a certain sense he was one of the early modern artists, in the sense that one get the feeling from his work that he was very much himself.
He is a genius. He is an absolutely outstanding, towering person who thinks and expresses and articulates through visual images, somebody with an enormous capacity for innovation.
Rembrandt became by far the greatest Dutch artist of the 17th century, a giant of the Baroque era. He was influenced by the artistic developments of his day, but from the very beginning of his working life, Rembrandt pursued his own agenda. His prodigious output of biblical images was unusual in a Protestant country like Holland. He was also a pioneer of the new technique of etching, while his lifelong series of self-portraits remain unrivaled. Rembrandt Haments van Rijn was born on the 15th of July 1606 in the university city of Leiden. The son of a miller, he was the 8th of 9 children. Details of his early life are sketchy, but his parents must have been impressed with his young intellect. At the age of 7, he was sent to Leiden's Latin school. 7 years later, he enrolled at the famous university there with the intention of studying classics. But already he knew that a life of books was not for him. He had begun to feel his real calling in life: art. Though no paintings of Rembrandt's youth have survived, at the age of just 14, he withdrew from university to begin his training as an artist. His first master was a local painter, Jacob von Swanenburg. He then journeyed to Amsterdam for a 6-month period in the studio of Pieter Lastman, a painter of historical scenes. Lastman had visited Italy to experience firsthand the great paintings of the Renaissance. But the young Rembrandt chose not to visit Rome, Florence, or Venice. Already he was making his own decisions and determining his own influences.
He was asked, why don't you go to Italy? And he said, well, why should I? Because there are prints available of all Italians, after the works of all great Italian masters. And Amsterdam is such an important city in the world, in the trading of art. The most important works of art come here to the market, and I can see them my own. So why should I bother and travel to Italy?
Rembrandt decided not to go to Italy. I think the main reason was that he was confident in himself. He wanted to set up by himself. In many ways, Rembrandt's desire to get on mimicked the kind of attitude that was present in the new nation of the United Provinces of Holland at the same time.
The influences a young artist is subject to are very hard to reconstruct. I think one of the most important teachers is not the word, but the influences must have been his friend Jan Lievens, who was younger than Rembrandt, but who was a child prodigy actually. He must have a great self-confidence, and one gets the feeling that he must have inspired in the first few years Rembrandt strongly. and that they then came into sort of artistic combat, so to say. And so his presence, and they may have even shared a studio, must have been of great importance for Rembrandt.
Lievens was seen as having greater ambitions, wanting to paint on a larger scale than Rembrandt. Rembrandt at this point is painting on quite a small scale, and that's a huge difference if one compares his early work with the work of his middle life.
In 1625, the 19-year-old artist was sufficiently talented to set up his own studio in his home city. The oldest known Rembrandt painting dates from that year. For its subject matter, the artist turned to the one book that filled him with enthusiasm, the Bible. This is the martyrdom of St. Stephen, a vibrant, dramatic canvas depicting the execution by stoning of the first Christian martyr. It is known as a history painting, which, at the time, was the highly regarded style of painting. With this canvas, the young Rembrandt proved his ability in the genre.
History painting is painting that illustrates the dramatic, climactic, if you like, moment in a meaningful story, and it depicts significant human action that can teach you. It has an exemplary function. It can teach you how to behave. So it has moral significance and moral worth in itself.
To be a history painter, you had to be able to paint anything. You know, you had to be a good still life painter because there were objects in the history. You had to be able to paint human flesh and the human proportions and human emotions, and you had to be able to paint a landscape if the history is playing in a landscape, etc. So only on the basis of that, history painting had a very high prestige. The work of Elsheimer he took as a starting point, and it is amazing how he develops his own stage direction for this scene. And it's a very clever painting, and in certain details it's absolutely already a masterpiece.
Around a third of Rembrandt's entire life's work would be inspired by the Bible, and his finest religious paintings are filled with scenes depicting Christ at the center of the action. In this 1626 panel, Rembrandt depicted the moment when Jesus drove out the money changers from the Temple of Jerusalem. Rembrandt was not only inspired by the New Testament. In this 1636 canvas, Rembrandt brought to life a terrible event described in the Book of Judges, the blinding of the Hebrew legend Samson by Philistine warriors. In the background, we see the Philistine woman Delilah clutching the hair that was the source of Samson's strength. In the foreground, the artist spares the viewer nothing in climactic drama. Samson's facial contortions are exactly what we would expect from anyone undergoing such a fate. Rembrandt also proved his ability to incorporate further narrative elements into the image, not just the actual moment of blinding. It is an image corresponding to the artistic spirit of the times, the spirit of the Baroque.
The composition as a whole is built in such a way that you can grasp the painting with one glance and then start reading the details. The way to do that is basically by handling the light properly, by sort of fusing certain elements in the painting into one larger lit area. The other thing which the Baroque art was special for is a very subtle play with asymmetry. So that you guide the eye through the use of light and the use of asymmetry, and in that way you bring in a certain motion into the image instead of a sum of parts. In fact, he improved on certain ideas which you must have known from Rubens, the Rubens ideas. I think he was a great thinker in these pictorial issues.
Another example of Rembrandt's Old Testament paintings can be seen in London's National Gallery. This 1635 canvas depicts the feast of the Babylonian prince Belshazzar and reveals the enthusiasm for exotic jewelry and fabrics that would stay with Rembrandt throughout his working life. This can be seen also in a painting from 4 years earlier, a depiction of Rembrandt's mother as the biblical prophetess Hannah. Rembrandt's craving for expensive, exotic objects led him to purchase large quantities of them, a habit that would eventually cause his financial downfall. But when Rembrandt's mother sat down to be painted, her son's career was just taking off. By 1631, Rembrandt had established himself in Leiden. At 25, he had already taken in his first pupils, including Gerrit Dou, an artist who would later become famous for his intricately detailed canvases. Word of Rembrandt's talent spread beyond Leiden. In 1628, the statesman Constantijn Huygens, secretary to Prince Hendrik Frederik, visited Rembrandt. Huygens was immediately impressed, and his influence led to valuable commissions, including this dramatic scene from the New Testament, which depicts Christ raising Lazarus from the dead after 4 days.
Rembrandt liked painting from the Bible, which of course was unusual in a Protestant country because there's this prohibition on images in Protestant churches. He liked the Bible as a source material for drama, rhetoric and action. The whole of human emotion is contained in the Bible, and Rembrandt was a great student of human emotion, so it gave him the opportunities to demonstrate what he could do.
There's a long tradition in religious painting of depicting themes from the Bible. He's more or less in another way involved. He's doing other things than other artists, mainly in making a thorough study of the tradition, the iconography in graphic art, and transferring the themes he found into the art of painting. And doing it, of course, in its unsurpassed technical way, but also introducing a new way of telling the stories to the people in such a way that he always is very keen in choosing a moment in which the core of the story is very brought to its essence.
When you have the intention to make history paintings, these history paintings do not deal with the kind of history we are calling history, but with the histories of the Bible, but also the histories from classical antiquity. And he also painted histories of classical antiquity. So I don't think it was a very special fixation on religion which expresses itself in his work.
Although religious paintings made Rembrandt wealthy, portrait commissions also began to arrive, especially from the rich burghers of Amsterdam. By 1631, Rembrandt had decided that he should relocate to the great city, and his early years in Amsterdam would be the most successful of his working life. Whilst still in Leiden, Rembrandt decided to use himself as the subject matter for his canvases. This self-portrait from 1629 is just one of 20 created by Rembrandt before his departure for Amsterdam.
He managed to create a light and dark structure in his work, which gives you the feeling that the light is, you could say, not spotlighting on the things. The light more and more starts roaming in space. And he was more than any other painter able to combine the use of light with creating a sense of atmosphere in which the figures are acting.
He probably learnt about chiaroscuro from Dutch followers of Caravaggio. The city of Utrecht was a hotbed for followers of Caravaggio. So that's where I think Rembrandt got the clue how to use chiaroscuro to dramatise his paintings. What we get with Rembrandt is that he uses impasto, so he pastes the paint on. So the highlights in white are very often very thick, whereas for the darks he used very thin down oil paint.
In 1631, Rembrandt arrived in Amsterdam. At the time, Amsterdam was an expanding city, built on international commerce. There was huge demand amongst its wealthier citizens for self-portraits. Frans Hals showed how a portraitist could capture the personality of the sitter at an instant in time. This portrait of the merchant Nicholas Raats proved that Rembrandt also possessed an uncanny ability to depict his fellow man.
Rembrandt started only in 1631 to make portraits, and the innovation of Rembrandt as a portrait painter was that what he had learned from history painting he applied in portraiture. That is, that he tried to make his figures act, even if they were depicted by themselves. He sometimes manages them to give you the feeling that they act instead of just stand and sit. But the great strength of a Rembrandt above a Frans Hals is that he deals with light in such a way that light really becomes light. Whereas in Frans Hals you have lit sides in the painting and shadow sides, but the light hardly ever gets that amazing strength which you have with a Rembrandt.
Rembrandt seemed to have a very penetrating portrait style. We get not only the likeness of the person, but we get some sense of their character and a deeper understanding of them. Compared to other artists of the day, for instance Frans Hals was the master of the passing moment, the kind of immediate sensation of portraiture. Rembrandt's is a much more investigative process. He digs deeper into the soul.